In the high mountains of southwestern Montana lies Bannack, one of the best preserved ghost towns in the United States. Bannack's story is unique and interesting, but it is also common enough to serve as an example of how many other western boom towns were founded, flourished, and died in the American West. In July of 1862, a small group of miners from Colorado were picking their way through the Rocky Mountains looking to strike it rich. The group was part of the so-called Pikes Peakers, a wave of fortune-seeking humanity that swept over the West after the initial and more famous wave of 1849. John White and his group stopped to pan what they called Grasshopper Creek, and it was there they found color in quantities they craved and others coveted. Soon a camp sprung up around the creek, and by the fall of 1862, 400 people called the camp home, but almost no one expected to be there long. Many in the camp were pessimistic about the camp's future. Many feared the winter as the camp was located in the upper part of the mountain range, making it difficult for supplies to reach the camp, thus starving out the populace. Still others feared the Shoshone or Bannock would drive them out of the canyon, or that the gold would run out before too long. None of these fears materialized, and through the winter and spring of 1862-1863, the camp was supplied and populated with fortune seekers. Within a year of John White's first discovery, the Bannock area was populated by over 3,000 people. Bannock took its name from the local Bannock Band, who were a group of northern Paiute people. When it became clear that the gold would not soon run out and that they would not starve, people began building more permanent structures and established a post office. When the post office name was submitted to Washington, D.C. in 1863, someone made an error and interpreted the O in Bannock as an A, an error that was never corrected. Bannock attracted people from all over the country. People from Minnesota settled a part of Bannock they called Yankee Flats. Deserters from both Union and Confederate armies found their way into Bannock, hoping for a fresh start with a sight of wealth, but couldn't leave their politics behind and segregated themselves in places like Bannock. Bannock in those early days was not a place of plenty, or was even terribly comfortable. People lived in tents, rough-cut cabins, or dugouts, places that back in the States would have only been seen as fit for livestock. Bannock residents learned to do with what they had, or do without. Food staples such as beef, pork, chicken, eggs, and butter had to be shipped in from far distances, and once arrived, merchants charged high prices for them. Local game and fish, however, were abundant, and the people of Bannock made use of them. In a letter to her family in November 1863, Mary Edgerton wrote that she and her family had, quote, baked mountain sheep, along with baked chicken for their Thanksgiving dinner. She described the baked mountain sheep as being excellent. Bannock residents also ate mule deer and moose. Many American mining camps were lonely places, and Bannock was no exception. Many miners wrote mournful passages in their journals recording their loneliness. One miner wrote, quote, "The moon cast a clear, soft light over the cabin, and through the open doorway, provoking thought and reflection. It became natural to think of friends and the ones I love, all so far away. I have no one to love and no one to caress. I feel so much alone." James K.P. Miller. As the roads to Bannock improved, so too did the available diversions for miners. Alcohol flowed freely in Bannock, though the quality was less than what one might expect. To help stretch what pure alcohol made it to Bannock, saloon owners did more than water it down. According to one former resident in 1863, quote, "Whiskey was often made with 2 barrels of water and a few plugs of tobacco, with a quantity of camphor and a little strychnine to give it tang, to a barrel of pure whiskey, making 3 barrels of red-eye. When the 40 rod got near the bottom of the barrel, it was so dangerous that a man sometimes dropped dead from the effects of a few glasses, having too much tang near the bottom of the barrel." End quote. Some men in Bannock drank to rejuvenate their bodies after standing in the cold Grasshopper Creek all day. Other men drank to forget their troubles. Between the liquor and loneliness was lawlessness. One of the few women in Bannock in 1863 wrote about how, quote, "No one thinks of punishing a man for shooting another." She wondered at how many deaths there might have been in the winter of 1862, if not for the fact that drunken men do not shoot well. Thomas Dimsdale speculated that between 1862 and 1863, there never was a mining town of the same size that contained more desperados and lawless characters than did Bannack. The ratio of men to women in Bannack in the early years was huge. There were the obvious prostitutes that helped ease the loneliness of the miners. There were the respectable women who were married and worked to preserve Christianity and culture in Bannack. There were, however, women who operated somewhere between virtue and vice. In Bannack, they were known as hurdy-gurdy girls. Hurdy-gurdy girls were girls men paid to dance with them for the length of a song, and in the early days of Bannack, that song was often played on a hurdy-gurdy. In future years, and in other places, these same kinds of dances were known as a dime a dance. In Bannack, the hurdy-gurdy girls could really rake it in, with dances costing 50 cents to $1. Hurdy-gurdy girls were not necessarily prostitutes, but some prostitutes were also hurdy-gurdy girls. Some saloons and hurdy-gurdy houses ran 24 hours on weekends to meet the demand of thirsty miners, in both senses of the word. The social lives of the more respectable townsfolk were no less active. Many balls and dance parties were hosted with regularity. The music accompanying their parties was more refined. Rather than dance to the twangy whine of a hurdy-gurdy, they danced everything from waltzes to folk dances, like the Virginia Reel. Among the more interesting people to call Bannack home was Henry Plummer. Henry Plummer operated on both sides of the law, often at the same time. Plummer left Maine in 1852 to find his fortunes in California, where, within 4 years, he owned a mine, cattle ranch, and a bakery in Nevada City. In 1857, he killed a man and was sentenced to serve 10 years in San Quentin, but was pardoned in 1859. By the time he arrived in Bannack in 1862, Plummer had 2 more men on his conscience, and added a third when he shot and killed a traveling partner in a Bannack saloon. The townspeople considered the killing self-defense. Henry Plummer continued to have run-ins with the law around Bannack, culminating in a shootout with then-Sheriff Crawford. Plummer suffered a gunshot to the arm, and Crawford left town. Oddly enough, Plummer was elected the new sheriff. Plummer had a small gallows erected above Bannack, and hung a convicted murderer from it, sending a clear signal to the townsfolk that he meant business. After the hanging, life in Bannack did settle down somewhat. Plummer kept his headquarters in Bannack, but was often away attending to his law enforcement duties. It was under Plummer's administration, however, that the danger to travelers in the region grew significantly. Highwaymen, or road agents as they were called, took the money and lives of many people traveling overland. Finally, crime became so bad that the local citizenry of Bannack, along with those in Virginia City in Alder Gulch, formed a vigilance committee in December 1863, dedicated to ending the crime wave. The vigilantes acted swiftly, sending out posses to capture known or suspected road agents. In late December, a posse captured one Erastus Red Yeager, who confessed and identified a number of other road agents, including Plummer. Plummer, said Yeager, was the leader of a criminal gang who perversely called themselves the Innocents. Acting on this information, the vigilantes captured Plummer and 2 of his associates on the evening of January 10, 1864, without firing a shot. Plummer, along with his comrades, were marched up the hill to Plummer's own gallows, where they hung until dead. The next day in Bannack, the vigilantes attempted to question one Joe Pisanthia. When Joe refused and wounded 2 vigilantes, a mob broke out and opened fire on Joe's cabin, using a cannon under the care of a local federal official, Sidney Edgerton. Joe was wounded in the bombardment and dragged from the ruins and was brutally shot. The mob set fire to his cabin and tossed his corpse into it. The vigilantes pursued the remaining road agents and by early February had captured and killed 20 men, including Cyrus Skinner, a former Bannack saloon owner whose building still stands today. Another one of Bannack's early citizens who forever left their mark on the town was Sidney Edgerton, who was appointed to be Chief Justice of the newly created Territory of Idaho in the summer of 1863. Edgerton, along with his family and some extended family, arrived in Bannock in September of that year. Edgerton opted to stay in Bannock for the safety of his family, fearing they would not make it to the Territorial Capital of Lewiston before heavy snows. Rather than have the Chief Justice administer courts from the capital, Territorial Governor William Wallace kept Edgerton in Bannock, apparently not bothered by the fact that there was no one qualified to serve Edgerton his oath of office, and Edgerton, therefore, never became Chief Justice in legal fact. The Edgertons purchased a rough-cut cabin formerly used as a store for $400 and fixed it up to meet their needs. After the bloody justice exercised by the vigilantes subsided, Edgerton traveled east to Washington, D.C., along with other prominent citizens from Virginia City. Edgerton and his associates argued that the Idaho Territory was far too large to be properly administered, and lobbied for the creation of a new territory called Montana. Edgerton used Bannock gold to help convince Congress that the creation of a new territory would benefit the Union, then engaged in a civil war. Before Edgerton left Washington, he met with President Lincoln and asked for the governorship of the new territory. Lincoln said he'd think about it, and Edgerton left the city without an answer. Upon arriving back in Bannock, Edgerton learned of his appointment to the governorship of the Territory of Montana, and Bannock became the territory's first capital. The legislature met in rough-cut log buildings, and only a thin curtain in Edgerton's home separated his family life from his public life. Bannock as the seat of territorial power lasted only a few short months. Perhaps it was the tight quarters and climate of the town that prompted a change of location. In any event, the legislature moved the territorial capital to Virginia City in February 1865. Edgerton left Montana to once again lobby Congress for the benefit of the territory. He failed, and though still governor, he did not return to Montana, opting instead to return to his law practice in Ohio. After its first few years of high excitement, Bannock settled down into a community supported by mining and ranching. Food and other commodities arrived in greater quantities, and life in Bannock became more affordable. Gold mining continued to be a big economic driver in and around Bannock. Placer mining gave way to hard rock mining, and later, entire hillsides were washed away with hydraulic mining. And eventually the creek was dug and sifted with large steam and electrically powered dredging boats. Though no longer the territorial capital, Bannock was made the county seat for Beaverhead County. No county could operate properly without a courthouse, and so a large brick courthouse was built in 1875. The courthouse served the legal needs of the county until 1881, when Dillon, thanks to the Utah Northern Railroad, boomed, and was popularly elected to be the new county seat. After serving as the courthouse, the grand brick building stood vacant until 1891, when it was purchased for a mere $1,200 by Dr. John Singleton Meade, who transformed the building into the fine Meade Hotel. The Meade Hotel housed and fed travelers to Bannock through small mining booms up until the 1940s. Erected 1 year before the courthouse, Bannock Freemasons constructed a dual-purpose building that would serve both their fraternity as well as the community. The Masons built a fine 2-story white building, which housed a large schoolroom on the ground floor, with a second floor reserved for the meetings and rituals of the Masons. The Masonic Lodge served to educate the children of Bannock through the 1930s. Bannock gained its Methodist church building in 1877, after the town feared an attack by the Nez Perce, who were evading federal troops sent to force them onto a reservation. The Nez Perce never attacked the town, but did kill a few ranch hands nearby. The scare, along with the convincing words of an itinerant Methodist preacher called Brother Van, prompted the residents to give some formal place for religion in Bannock, and they constructed the town's only church, which still stands today. Over the course of the 20th century, Bannock became ever quieter as the dredges shut down and the mines became unprofitable. Serious preservation efforts began in 1947, when groups of citizens in nearby Dillon began purchasing property in Bannock. Much of Bannock was donated later to the state of Montana in 1954, and now operates as a state park, open to visitor exploration. Each July, Bannock once again bursts to life for Bannock Days, with food and living history displays, along with dramatic reenactments of Bannock's wilder days. Though the saloons are still, and the gold run out, Bannock is still rich in history and stories for anyone that takes an interest.